For years, the images coming back from telescopes and orbital tracking stations made no sense. Objects in orbits that did not match any known satellite profile. Maneuvers that no communications platform or weather monitor needs to perform. Rendezvous operations between Chinese spacecraft that were never publicly announced, never explained, and never claimed. Analysts at space tracking organizations around the world were logging the data, flagging the anomalies, and quietly asking the same question nobody wanted to say out loud. What is China actually building up there? In 2026, enough pieces have come together that the picture is no longer speculative. Defense researchers, orbital mechanics analysts, and intelligence assessments from multiple Western governments have begun pointing at the same conclusion. And the conclusion is not comfortable. What China has been assembling in orbit over the past decade is not a space station in any conventional sense. It is not a science platform. It is not a communications relay network. It is something that has no real precedent in the history of human spaceflight. Something that combines capabilities that were previously only theorized, and something that fundamentally changes what conflict in space would actually look like. This is the story of what China has been building, how they built it without most of the world noticing, and why the people whose job it is to track these things are using words they do not use lightly. Start in 2010. China's space program at that point was impressive but not alarming. They had put astronauts in orbit. They were developing their own space station. They were making steady progress on lunar missions. Western space agencies monitored all of it with professional interest but not particular urgency. China was doing what every major space power does. It was building capability. What was not being watched closely enough was a parallel track running underneath the headline Missions. A series of satellites launched under vague designations, described in official Chinese statements with language so general it was essentially meaningless. Research satellite, technology demonstration mission, experimental platform. The designations told trackers almost nothing about what the spacecraft were actually doing, and for a long time most analysts filed them away as routine military reconnaissance assets, the kind every major power operates and nobody gets too alarmed about. Then the satellites started moving in ways that reconnaissance satellites do not move. Reconnaissance satellites follow predictable orbital patterns. They are optimized to pass over specific ground targets at regular intervals. Their orbits are stable because stability is what makes them useful. These Chinese spacecraft were doing something different. They were maneuvering, changing orbits, approaching other satellites, parking in positions relative to other objects in ways that seemed deliberate and tactical rather than operational. And when analysts started cross-referencing the movements with the positions of American military satellites, the pattern became very difficult to explain away. In 2022, something happened in geostationary orbit that shook the intelligence community far more than was publicly reported at the time. A Chinese satellite designated SJ-21, which had been described officially as a space debris mitigation technology demonstrator, approached a defunct Chinese satellite, grappled it with a robotic arm, and towed it to a graveyard orbit tens of thousands of kilometers away. The entire operation was tracked by Western monitoring systems. It was smooth, precise, and demonstrated a level of on-orbit robotics capability that most analysts had not expected China to possess at that level of maturity. The official explanation was entirely benign. China said it was cleaning up space debris, which is a real and legitimate problem that the entire space community needs to address. The technology required to grab a dead satellite and move it is genuinely useful for debris removal. Nobody disputed that. What the debris removal explanation did not address was why a debris removal satellite needed to be operating in geostationary orbit, which is where the most strategically valuable communications and early warning satellites live, or why the same class of spacecraft had been observed parking within uncomfortably close proximity to American military satellites before moving away, or why the robotic arm technology being demonstrated was essentially identical to what you would need to physically disable, reposition, or capture an adversary's operational satellite during a conflict. The capability demonstrated by SJ-21 works perfectly for debris removal. It also works perfectly for something else entirely, and the distinction between the two applications is entirely a matter of intent, which is exactly the kind of ambiguity that makes space security so genuinely difficult to manage. SJ-21 was not an isolated case. Its predecessor, a satellite called Shijian-17, had been doing something equally unsettling for years before the grappling operation made headlines. Shijian-17 had been maneuvering through geostationary orbit, parking near various satellites, and appearing to observe them at close range. Not interfering, not jamming, just watching. That behavior sounds benign until you think about what it actually means in a conflict scenario. Every military satellite has characteristics that its operators work hard to conceal. The precise frequency bands it uses, the specific antenna configurations, the patterns that reveal what it is looking at and when, the vulnerabilities in its design that only become apparent when you can observe it operating up close over an extended period of time. A satellite that can park next to an adversary's most sensitive space assets and quietly study them for months is not doing debris removal. It is doing something that has a very different name in the intelligence community. The United States has its own history of conducting close-approach satellite operations, so the American response to Chinese behavior in this space has been measured rather than openly accusatory. But there is a difference in scale and apparent ambition between what the U.S. has historically done in this domain and what China appears to be systematically building. The American programs were largely about developing the capability and understanding what was possible. What China appears to be building is an operational architecture, a system of systems designed not just to demonstrate that something can be done, but to be able to do it reliably, repeatedly, and at multiple locations simultaneously. Here is where the story moves from unsettling to something that defense analysts describe with considerably more charged language. In 2021, China tested something that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time called, in a rare moment of public candor, very concerning. A hypersonic glide vehicle was launched into orbit, circled the Earth, and then descended toward a target. The test was not publicly announced by China. It was revealed by reporting based on intelligence sources and subsequently confirmed by Chinese officials who described it as a routine spacecraft test. A hypersonic glide vehicle launched from orbit is not a routine spacecraft. It is a weapons delivery system with characteristics that make existing missile defense architectures almost entirely irrelevant. Traditional ballistic missiles follow a predictable arc. Radar systems can track them, calculate their trajectory, and provide warning time measured in minutes. A weapon that achieves orbital velocity, can maneuver while in orbit, and then descends as a hypersonic glide vehicle does not follow a predictable arc. It can approach a target from any direction. It can maneuver during descent to defeat interception attempts. And because it reaches orbital altitude before descending, it can bypass the radar coverage that missile defense systems depend on for early warning. The capability is called a fractional orbital bombardment system, and it is not a new concept. The Soviet Union developed and briefly deployed a version of it during the Cold War before it was prohibited under arms control agreements that China never signed. The Chinese test suggested that the concept had been revisited, refined using modern hypersonic technology, and tested at a level of sophistication significantly beyond what the Soviets achieved in the 1960s. Taken alone, that test would be alarming, but contained. What makes it part of a larger and more coherent picture is what it suggests when placed alongside everything else China has been quietly assembling in orbit. China's Tiangong space station completed its core configuration in 2022 and has been continuously crewed since then. The official mission profile reads like any other national space station program. scientific experiments, microgravity research, Earth observation, technology demonstrations, crew rotation missions. All of it is real. All of it is happening. What is also happening is less prominently discussed. Tiangong's orbital inclination, the angle of its orbit relative to Earth's equator, gives it coverage over a significant portion of Earth's surface that includes virtually every major military installation, naval base, and strategic site in the world below a certain latitude. The station carries optical systems whose resolution has been a subject of considerable interest to Western intelligence analysts. And crucially, it serves as a crewed node in a broader orbital architecture that includes the maneuvering satellites, the robotic servicing vehicles, and the experimental platforms that China has been deploying in increasing numbers. A crewed space station is not a weapons platform. The Outer Space Treaty, which China has signed, prohibits placing weapons of mass destruction in orbit. But a crewed space station can serve as a command and coordination node. It can serve as a servicing facility for other spacecraft. It can demonstrate and refine the operational procedures for on-orbit activities that have both civilian and military applications. The line between what Tiangong is officially doing and what the broader architecture it sits within is designed to enable is not a sharp line. It is exactly the kind of deliberate ambiguity that China has become very skilled at maintaining. Beyond the hardware in orbit, China has been developing a ground-based counter-space arsenal that intelligence assessments describe as the most comprehensive of any nation. This arsenal operates across multiple domains simultaneously and is designed to give China the ability to degrade, disrupt, or destroy adversary space capabilities without necessarily firing a single kinetic weapon. The electronic warfare component involves ground-based systems capable of jamming the signals that GPS satellites transmit to receivers on Earth, disrupting communication satellites, and blinding the optical sensors on reconnaissance platforms. Jamming is not new. Every major military has jamming capabilities. What distinguishes China's approach is the scale, the geographic distribution of jamming assets, and the integration of jamming capabilities with other counterspace tools into what appears to be a coordinated operational doctrine. The directed energy component is where assessments become more classified and therefore more fragmented in public reporting, but enough has been confirmed or officially acknowledged to establish the basic picture. China has developed ground-based laser systems capable of dazzling or damaging the optical sensors on low Earth orbit reconnaissance satellites as they pass overhead. Dazzling means temporarily blinding a sensor with a laser pulse intense enough to overwhelm it without causing permanent damage. Damaging means something more permanent. Both capabilities have been tested. The distinction between them in operational use is again largely a matter of intent. The kinetic component was demonstrated most dramatically in 2007 when China destroyed one of its own aging weather satellites with a ground-launched missile, creating a debris field that remains a hazard to orbital operations to this day. That test was internationally condemned, and China has not repeated a kinetic anti-satellite test in the same manner since. But the underlying capability was demonstrated and has been refined. More recently, China has tested what analysts describe as co-orbital anti-satellite systems, weapons that maneuver alongside a target satellite before disabling or destroying it, rather than being launched from the ground on an intercept trajectory. These are harder to detect, harder to attribute, and considerably harder to defend against. Put all of these pieces together, and a coherent operational picture emerges that defense planners find genuinely alarming. Not because any single capability is unprecedented, but because of how they fit together into a system designed for a specific strategic purpose. Modern American military power depends on space to a degree that has no historical parallel. GPS navigation underpins precision weapons, troop movements, naval operations, and air power. Reconnaissance satellites provide the real-time intelligence that informs every significant operational decision. Communication satellites link commanders to units across global distances. Early warning satellites detect missile launches within seconds of ignition, remove those capabilities, or seriously degrade them. And American military power does not simply become less effective. It becomes qualitatively different in ways that fundamentally alter the balance of any conflict. China appears to have built a system designed to do exactly that. Not to win a war in space, which is not really a coherent concept, but to be able to selectively blind, deafen, and disorient an adversary's space-dependent military capabilities at the moment when doing so would matter most. Jam GPS over a specific operational theater. Blind reconnaissance satellites during a critical window. Disable communications relays serving a carrier strike group. Use co-orbital systems to hold high-value satellites at risk without necessarily destroying them, creating a threat that forces an adversary to divert attention and resources to defending assets that may never actually be attacked. This is not science fiction. This is the operational doctrine that analysts have been assembling from observable behavior, official Chinese military publications, and intelligence assessments that have become increasingly specific in their conclusions. The uncomfortable truth about where things stand in 2026 is that the warning signs were visible for a long time. Chinese military doctrine has explicitly identified space as a domain where achieving superiority in the early stages of a conflict would be decisive. Official publications from the People's Liberation Army Strategic Support Force, the branch responsible for space and cyber operations, have described space as the high ground of the high ground, a domain whose control determines what is possible in every other domain below it. The investment patterns were visible. The satellite launch cadence was visible. The orbital maneuvers were being tracked. What was perhaps not fully appreciated until recently was how far along the integration of all these capabilities actually was. Not individual technologies in development, but a maturing operational architecture approaching the kind of reliability and redundancy that makes it a real military tool rather than a collection of impressive demonstrations. Space has always been militarized, in the sense that military satellites have operated there for decades. What China appears to be building is something different. A system designed not just to use space, but to be able to control who else can use it effectively, under conditions of conflict, in ways that would reshape the outcome of any major confrontation before a single shot was fired on the ground. The people whose job it is to watch this are not given to dramatic language. When they start using words like alarming, unprecedented, and destabilizing to describe what they are seeing in orbit, the rest of the world should probably be paying attention. The stars have always looked peaceful from down here. What is happening among them right now is anything